I was pulling into my driveway in Scottsdale, Arizona, after a long Tuesday at work, when I noticed something odd attached to my mailbox. From a distance, it looked like someone had wrapped something around the front of it, and as I got closer, my stomach dropped. There was a heavy-duty padlock securing my mailbox shut, with a bright orange notice taped to the front. My name is Marcus Webb, and I had been living in the Saguaro Springs community for about 3 years. It was one of those planned neighborhoods with identical beige houses, perfectly manicured lawns, and an HOA that seemed to exist solely to make everyone's life miserable. The president of our HOA was a woman named Patricia Hendricks, though everyone called her Patty behind her back, usually followed by some choice words I won't repeat here. I got out of my truck and walked over to examine the lock more closely. The notice was printed on HOA letterhead, and I felt my blood pressure rising as I read it. Violation notice. Mailbox does not conform to community standards. Access restricted until compliant mailbox is installed. You have 72 hours to replace with approved model. Fine of $100 per day until resolved. I stood there in the Arizona heat, sweating through my work shirt, trying to process what I was seeing. My mailbox was the same one that had been there when I bought the house. It was a standard black metal mailbox on a post, nothing fancy, nothing broken. I had never received any previous notices about it being non-compliant. I pulled out my phone and called my wife, Jennifer. "Hey, you're not going to believe this. The HOA put a lock on our mailbox." "They did what?" she asked, and I could hear her putting down whatever she was doing. "Why would they do that? Apparently our mailbox doesn't meet their standards. There's a notice saying we have 72 hours to replace it, or they're fining us $100 a day." Jennifer was quiet for a moment, then said, "Marcus, isn't it illegal to mess with someone's mailbox? I thought that was a federal thing." That's when it clicked. She was absolutely right. Mailboxes are under federal jurisdiction because they're part of the United States Postal Service system. I had heard something about this years ago, but never thought about it much. "I think you might be onto something. Let me make some calls." I went inside and immediately started researching. Sure enough, federal law under Title 18, United States Code. Section 1705 makes it illegal to tamper with mailboxes or obstruct mail delivery. Mailboxes are considered federal property in terms of their function, even if homeowners own the physical box. Nobody except the homeowner and postal workers are allowed to place items in or restrict access to mailboxes. The next morning, I woke up early and drove straight to the post office on East Indian School Road before work. I asked to speak with someone about a mailbox issue, and after a short wait, I was directed to a back office where a man in his 50s with graying hair and a serious expression sat behind a desk. "I'm Postal Inspector Raymond Chen," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "What seems to be the problem?" I explained the situation, showing him photos I had taken of the locked mailbox and the HOA notice. His expression grew darker with each photo he looked at. "Mr. Webb, this is a serious federal offense," Inspector Chen said, leaning back in his chair. "The HOA has violated federal law by restricting access to your mailbox. They have no authority to do this under any circumstances. Even if your mailbox was somehow non-compliant with their rules, which is questionable since mail receptacles fall under postal regulations, they absolutely cannot prevent you or your mail carrier from accessing it." "So what happens now?" I asked. Inspector Chen pulled out a notepad and started writing. "I'm going to pay your HOA a visit today. What's the name of the president?" "Patricia Hendricks." "Everyone calls her Patty." He nodded, writing it down. "I'm going to give them 48 hours to remove that lock and restore full access to your mailbox. plus provide written assurance that they will not interfere with any mailboxes in the community again. If they don't comply, they'll be facing federal charges for mail tampering and obstruction. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Thank you, Inspector Chen. I really appreciate this. This is what I'm here for, he said, standing up. Mailbox tampering is taken very seriously. Give me your address and contact information. I'll be in touch. I left the post office feeling vindicated. I had dealt with the HOA's petty rules before: notices about my trash cans being visible from the street, complaints about a small crack in my driveway, warnings about the wrong shade of beige paint on my front door. But this was different. They had crossed a line and they were about to learn that some things were beyond their control. I went to work but couldn't focus. I kept checking my phone, wondering what was happening. Around 2 in the afternoon, I got a text from my neighbor, Gary, who lived 2 houses down. Dude, there's a government car at the HOA office. Did something happen? I texted back, yeah, HOA messed with the wrong mailbox. At 4:30, I got a call from an unknown number. Mr. Webb, this is Inspector Chen. I've just finished meeting with Mrs. Hendricks and the HOA board. Let's just say they weren't very cooperative at first. What happened, Mrs. Hendricks initially tried to argue that the HOA has the right to enforce community standards, even on mailboxes. I explained that federal law supersedes HOA regulations when it comes to mail receptacles. She then claimed that your mailbox was an eyesore and that multiple residents had complained. I rolled my eyes. That's ridiculous. My mailbox looks like everyone else's on the street. That's what I observed when I drove through your neighborhood before the meeting, Inspector Chen said. I informed the board that they have 48 hours to remove the lock from your mailbox, and that any further interference with mailboxes in the community would result in federal charges. I also advised them that the $100 per day fine they threatened you with is not enforceable and that you should not pay it. How did Patty take that? Inspector Chen chuckled. Not well. She insisted that I didn't understand how HOAs work, and that they have a right to maintain property values. I explained that maintaining property values doesn't give them the right to commit federal crimes. The other board members seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation, even if Mrs. Hendricks didn't. Do you think they'll comply? They'd better. I made it very clear what the consequences would be. I'll be checking your mailbox personally in 48 hours. If that lock is still there, I'll be filing charges. I thanked him again and hung up. When I got home that evening, the lock was still on my mailbox. I wasn't surprised. The HOA had 48 hours, and knowing Patty, she'd probably use every minute of it to stew in her anger. Jennifer was in the kitchen making dinner when I came in. Well, what happened? I filled her in on everything, and she shook her head in disbelief. I can't believe Patty actually thought she could get away with this. What was she thinking? She's drunk on power, I said, grabbing a beer from the fridge. She's been running this HOA like her personal fiefdom for years, and nobody's ever really challenged her. The next day at work, I got a call from a number I recognized as Patty's personal cell phone. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Marcus, we need to talk, Patty said without preamble. Her voice had that fake sweet tone that set my teeth on edge. About what, Patty? This situation with your mailbox has gotten out of hand. I think there's been a misunderstanding. If you just agree to replace your mailbox with one of the approved models, we can make this whole thing go away. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Patty, you put a lock on my mailbox and threatened me with illegal fines. Then a federal postal inspector told you that you broke the law. There's no misunderstanding here. Marcus, you need to understand that we're all part of a community here. When you bought your house, you agreed to follow HOA rules. Your mailbox is outdated and doesn't match the aesthetic we're trying to maintain. My mailbox is identical to half the mailboxes in this neighborhood, I said, my patience wearing thin. And even if it wasn't, you don't have the right to lock it. That's a federal crime. Federal crime, she scoffed. That inspector was just trying to intimidate us. HOAs have rights too, you know. We have a duty to maintain property values for all residents. Patty, I'm not paying any fine and I'm not replacing my mailbox. If you don't remove that lock by tomorrow afternoon, you're going to be facing federal charges. The inspector wasn't joking. Are you threatening me? No, I'm repeating what a federal law enforcement officer told you yesterday. Remove the lock. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat at my desk, shaking my head. The woman was unbelievable. That evening, I was in the garage organizing some tools when Gary came over. He was carrying 2 beers and had a grin on his face. Man, the whole neighborhood is talking about this mailbox thing, he said, handing me a beer. Patty's been calling an emergency board meeting for tonight. How do you know that? My wife is friends with Donna Martinez, who's on the board. Apparently, Patty is losing her mind. She's convinced that you're trying to undermine the HOA's authority and that if she backs down, everyone will start ignoring the rules. I took a long drink of beer. She's insane. This isn't about undermining anything. She literally broke federal law. I know that and you know that, but Patty sees everything as a personal attack. Remember when she tried to fine the Johnsons because their daughter drew hopscotch squares on their driveway with chalk? I did remember. The Johnsons had told her where she could stick her fine, and the chalk had washed away in the next rain anyway. But this was different. This involved federal law enforcement. Gary, do you know if anyone else has had problems with their mailboxes? He thought for a moment. Actually, yeah. About 6 months ago, the Ray's family got a notice that their mailbox post was the wrong color. They had to repaint it. And I think the Patel family got something too, but I don't remember what it was about. This was bigger than I thought. If Patty had been harassing other residents about their mailboxes, Inspector Chen needed to know. The next morning, I called Inspector Chen and told him about the other families who had received mailbox-related notices from the HOA. That's very interesting, Mr. Webb, he said. If the HOA has been systematically trying to regulate mailboxes, that's a pattern of behavior that concerns me. Would you be able to get contact information for these other residents? I can try. I spent my lunch break texting and calling neighbors. By the end of the day, I had spoken with the Ray's family, the Patels, and 3 other families who had all received some kind of notice about their mailboxes from the HOA over the past year. The complaints ranged from the color of mailbox, posts to the style of the boxes themselves to the placement of house numbers on the boxes. I forwarded all the information to Inspector Chen, who thanked me and said he'd follow up with each family. That evening, as I was pulling into my driveway, I noticed the lock was still on my mailbox. It was now 6 o'clock on Thursday evening, which meant Patty had less than 24 hours to remove it before her deadline was up. Around 8 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Donna Martinez standing there looking uncomfortable. "Marcus, can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked. I invited her in and Jennifer brought her some iced tea. Donna was in her early 60s, a retired schoolteacher who had been on the HOA board for about a year. "I want to apologize for this whole mess," Donna said, perching on the edge of our couch. "I was at the board meeting when Patty proposed putting locks on non-compliant mailboxes, and I should have objected more strongly." "Why didn't you?" she sighed. "Honestly." "Because arguing with Patty is exhausting. She steamrolls over everyone, and the other board members just go along with whatever she wants to avoid conflict. But this has gone too far. I spoke with the postal inspector today, and he made it very clear that what we did was illegal. So what's going to happen?" I've been pushing for us to remove the lock immediately and issue you an apology. 2 other board members agree with me, but Patty is refusing. She's convinced that if we back down, we'll lose all credibility and authority in the community. Jennifer leaned forward. Donna, does she understand that she could be criminally charged? This isn't about HOA politics, this is federal law. I've tried to explain that to her, we all have, but she's not listening. She keeps saying that the postal inspector is bluffing and that HOAs have legal protections for enforcement actions. I shook my head. She's going to get herself arrested. Donna nodded miserably. I know. I'm going to resign from the board after this is resolved. I can't be part of this anymore. After Donna left, Jennifer and I sat in the living room, both of us stunned by the situation's escalation. Do you think Patty will actually let this go to charges? Jennifer asked. I honestly don't know, I said. Part of me thinks she'll cave at the last minute, but another part of me thinks she's too stubborn and proud to back down. Friday morning arrived and the lock was still on my mailbox. I called Inspector Chen to let him know. I'll be there at 3 o'clock, he said. That's when the 48 hours is officially up. If the lock is still there, I'll be proceeding with charges. I took the afternoon off work and was home by 2:30. At 2:45, I saw Patty's silver Lexus pull up in front of my house. She got out holding a clipboard and marched up to my front door. I opened it before she could knock. Patty. Marcus, I'm here to offer you a compromise, she said, her voice tight. The board has agreed that if you purchase an approved mailbox within the next 30 days, we'll waive all fines and remove the lock today. Patty, there shouldn't be any fines to waive. What you did was illegal, and I'm not buying a new mailbox. Her face flushed red. You are being incredibly selfish. Do you know how much work I put into maintaining this community? Do you know how many hours I volunteer to keep our property values high? And this is the thanks I get. You sick a federal inspector on me. You locked my mailbox, I said, keeping my voice level. You committed a federal crime. I didn't make you do that. It's not a crime to enforce community standards. It is when those standards involve tampering with mail receptacles. She opened her mouth to respond, but then I saw Inspector Chen's official vehicle pull up behind her car. He got out, wearing his postal inspector uniform, and walked toward us carrying a briefcase. Mrs. Hendricks, he said, nodding at her. Mr. Webb. Patty turned to face him, clutching her clipboard like a shield. Inspector Chen, I'm glad you're here. We were just discussing a resolution to this situation. The only resolution I'm interested in is whether that lock has been removed from Mr. Webb's mailbox, Inspector Chen said. Has it? We're working on it, Patty said. These things take time. There are procedures we have to follow, board votes that need to happen. Inspector Chen walked past us to the mailbox. The lock was still firmly in place. He pulled out his phone and took several photographs, then made some notes on a tablet he was carrying. Mrs. Hendricks, the 48 hours I gave you expired 15 minutes ago. The lock is still in place. I'm going to have to proceed with filing charges. Patty's face went from red to pale. You can't be serious. This is ridiculous. We're talking about a mailbox. We're talking about federal law, Inspector Chen said. You were given clear instructions and adequate time to comply. You chose not to. I want to speak to your supervisor, Patty demanded. You're welcome to do that, but it won't change anything. The evidence is clear and the law is explicit. He turned to me. Mr. Webb, do you have a bolt cutter or any tool that could remove this lock? I've got bolt cutters in the garage. Please get them. I'm authorizing you to remove this lock from your mailbox. I retrieved my bolt cutters, and with one quick squeeze, the padlock fell to the ground. It felt incredibly satisfying. Inspector Chen picked up the lock and dropped it into an evidence bag. Mrs. Hendricks, you'll be receiving official notification of the charges within the next week. I'm recommending prosecution for mail obstruction under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1702. You should contact an attorney. Patty looked like she was going to be sick. This is insane. I'm going to fight this. The HOA has lawyers. That's your right, Inspector Chen said. But I'd advise you to take this seriously. Federal mail crimes carry significant penalties. After Inspector Chen left, Patty stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring at the lock-free mailbox. Then she looked at me with pure venom in her eyes. "You've made a huge mistake," she said quietly. "You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started. Your life in this community is going to become very difficult." "Are you threatening me, Patty?" "I'm stating facts. Good luck getting any approvals for anything. Want to repaint your house, install a new fence, plant a tree. I'll make sure every single request gets denied or delayed as long as legally possible." Jennifer stepped out onto the porch. "And we'll report every instance of harassment to Inspector Chen and file complaints against the HOA. Try us." Patty got in her car and drove off, tires squealing slightly as she turned the corner. Over the weekend, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Neighbors were texting, calling, and stopping by to ask what had happened. The story had spread through the community like wildfire. Most people were supportive, telling me stories of their own run-ins with Patty and the HOA. A few, however, were critical, saying I was causing unnecessary drama and that I should have just replaced the mailbox to keep the peace. Gary came over on Saturday with some interesting news. "Dude, there's a petition going around to recall Patty from the HOA board. It already has like 50 signatures." "Who started it?" "The Patel family." Apparently, after Inspector Chen interviewed them about their mailbox issues, they decided enough was enough. They're collecting signatures to force a special election for HOA president. This was an unexpected development. I hadn't intended to start a revolution in the HOA, but apparently that's what was happening. On Monday morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. It was from the HOA attorney, a law firm in downtown Phoenix. The letter stated that while the HOA was reviewing the mailbox incident, they were simultaneously notifying me of several other violations they had identified during a recent inspection of my property. I read through the list with increasing disbelief. They were claiming my front yard grass was 1/4 inch too long, that there was a visible water stain on my driveway, that my house numbers were fading and needed to be replaced, and that I had placed my trash cans at the curb 3 hours earlier than allowed by HOA rules. Each violation came with a $50 fine. Jennifer read the letter over my shoulder. This is retaliation. This is exactly what she said she'd do. I called Inspector Chen and sent him a copy of the letter. He called me back within an hour. "Mr. Webb, this does appear to be retaliatory. I'm going to include this in my report. Also, I wanted to let you know that I've completed my investigation. I interviewed 7 families who all experienced similar mailbox-related harassment from your HOA over the past 18 months. The pattern is clear and concerning. What happens now? The case has been referred to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Phoenix. They'll decide whether to prosecute. Given the evidence and the pattern of behavior, I believe they will. Mrs. Hendricks will likely receive a summons within the next few weeks." I thanked him and hung up. Part of me felt bad that Patty was facing federal charges, but a larger part of me felt that she had brought this entirely on herself. She'd had multiple chances to back down and had refused every one of them. 2 days later, I got an email from the HOA board, specifically from Donna Martinez. The email informed all residents that Patricia Hendricks had been removed as HOA president by a vote of the board, and that Donna was serving as interim president until a special election could be held. The email also stated that all pending fines related to mailbox violations were being rescinded, and that the HOA would no longer attempt to regulate mailbox appearance, design, or placement, except to ensure compliance with federal postal regulations. I forwarded the email to Inspector Chen with a short note. "Looks like things are changing," he replied. "Good, but the criminal case will still proceed. Actions have consequences." The special election was held 3 weeks later. A man named Robert Chen, no relation to the inspector, ran for president on a platform of reducing HOA overreach and focusing on actual community needs like street repairs and park maintenance. He won by a landslide. In the meantime, Patty had received her summons to appear in federal court. According to Gary, who heard it from his wife, who heard it from someone else, Patty's lawyer had tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing that there was no criminal intent and that she had been acting in what she believed was the community's best interest. The motion was denied. About 6 weeks after the mailbox incident, I got a call from an assistant U.S. attorney named David Ortiz. He wanted to meet with me to discuss the case against Patricia Hendricks. I met him at a coffee shop near the federal courthouse in downtown Phoenix. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his mid-30s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Webb, thank you for meeting with me," he said after we'd both gotten coffee. "I want to walk you through what's going to happen with this case." "Okay. Mrs. Hendricks has been charged with mail obstruction, which is a federal misdemeanor. We're not pursuing felony charges given that this is her first offense, and there was no theft or destruction of mail. However, we are taking this seriously because of the pattern of behavior Inspector Chen documented. What kind of penalty is she looking at? If convicted, she could face up to a year in federal prison and a fine of up to $100,000. However, given the circumstances, we're willing to offer a plea deal." "What kind of deal?" "If she pleads guilty, we'll recommend probation, a significant fine, probably in the $20,000 range, and community service. She'll also have to agree to resign from any HOA board positions for a period of 5 years and complete a course on federal mail regulations." "Has she accepted the deal?" David shook his head. "Not yet. Her attorney is advising her to take it, but she's being stubborn. She still doesn't seem to fully grasp the seriousness of the situation." We talked for another 20 minutes about what I might need to do if the case went to trial. David said my testimony would be crucial, along with the testimonies of the other residents who had been harassed about their mailboxes. As I drove home, I thought about how one simple decision by Patty to lock my mailbox had spiraled into federal criminal charges, and her removal from the HOA board. All she'd had to do was leave my mailbox alone. All she'd had to do was respect boundaries and follow the law. But her need to control everything and everyone had been her downfall. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 months later. In the meantime, life in the neighborhood started to improve noticeably. Robert Chen proved to be a competent and reasonable HOA president. He established clear guidelines for what the HOA would and wouldn't regulate, set up a transparent process for requesting architectural changes, and started actually addressing maintenance issues that had been ignored for years. The ridiculous fines that Patty had tried to stick me with for the grass length and other petty violations were formally withdrawn. Robert personally called me to apologize on behalf of the HOA and to assure me that kind of retaliatory behavior would not be tolerated. "We're supposed to be making this a better place to live, not making residents' lives miserable," he told me. "I'm sorry you had to go through all of this." On the day of the preliminary hearing, I took the morning off work and drove to the federal courthouse. The building was impressive, all concrete and glass, with American flags flying out front. I went through security and found my way to the correct courtroom. David Ortiz met me outside. "She's still refusing the plea deal," he said. "We're going forward with the hearing." Inside the courtroom, I saw Patty sitting at the defendant's table with her attorney, a tired-looking man in an expensive suit. She looked smaller somehow, less imperious than she had that day she'd shown up at my house with her clipboard. The magistrate judge, a woman named Judge Sandra Morrison, entered, and we all stood. The hearing itself was relatively brief. David presented the evidence, the photos of the locked mailbox, Inspector Chen's report, testimonies from the other residents who had been harassed about their mailboxes, and the documentation of the HOA's pattern of attempting to regulate mail receptacles. Patty's attorney tried to argue that there was no criminal intent, that Patty had genuinely believed she was within her rights as HOA president, and that the 48-hour deadline had been insufficient time for the HOA board to meet and vote on removing the lock. Judge Morrison was not impressed. "Counsel, your client was explicitly told by a federal postal inspector that her actions were illegal and given ample time to rectify the situation. Ignorance of the law is not a defense, and the defendant had multiple opportunities to comply. I'm finding sufficient evidence to proceed to trial." Patty's face crumpled and I saw her wipe away tears. I didn't feel the triumph I might have expected. Instead, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. This whole thing had been so unnecessary. Outside the courthouse, Inspector Chen was waiting. He shook my hand. "Thank you for your cooperation with this investigation, Mr. Webb. Cases like this matter because they send a message that mail interference won't be tolerated, no matter who's doing it or why. Do you think she'll take the plea deal now?" "I'd be surprised if she doesn't. Her attorney knows she'll lose at trial. The evidence is overwhelming." 2 weeks later, I got a call from David Ortiz. "She took the plea," he said. "She'll be sentenced next month. I wanted to thank you for your willingness to testify if it had gone to trial." What made her finally agree? I think reality finally set in. Her attorney made her understand that if she went to trial and lost, the judge could sentence her to actual prison time. With the plea, she's guaranteed to get probation. The sentencing hearing was on a Thursday afternoon. I didn't attend, but David called me afterward to fill me in. "Judge Morrison accepted the plea agreement," he said. "Mrs. Hendricks was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a fine of $25,000. She's also prohibited from serving on any HOA board for 5 years and has to complete a course on federal mail regulations and HOA governance." "How did she take it?" She cried and apologized. She gave a statement saying she'd let her desire to maintain community standards cloud her judgment, and that she now understood the seriousness of what she'd done. Whether she really gets it or whether she's just saying what she thinks the judge wants to hear, I don't know. After the sentencing, things in the Saguaro Springs community settled into a new normal. Robert Chen continued as HOA president and was formally elected to a full term 6 months later. The HOA's focus shifted to things that actually mattered: organizing neighborhood events, maintaining common areas, and advocating with the city for better street lighting and traffic controls. I never spoke to Patty again. I'd see her occasionally, usually getting into her car or checking her mail. She'd avoid eye contact and hurry inside. According to the neighborhood grapevine, she'd put her house on the market and was planning to move to a condo in Tempe where she wouldn't have to deal with an HOA. One evening, about 8 months after the whole incident began, I was sitting on my front porch with Jennifer, watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and pink. My mailbox stood at the end of the driveway, lock-free and unmolested. "Do you ever regret how everything went down?" Jennifer asked. I thought about it. "No, I mean, I wish it hadn't been necessary. I wish Patty had just been reasonable from the start, but I don't regret standing up for myself. If I hadn't, she'd still be harassing people about their mailboxes and finding other ways to abuse her power." "The neighborhood is so much better now," Jennifer said. "People actually seem happy to live here instead of just stressed about what the HOA might come after them for next." She was right. There was a different energy in the community now. People chatted more with their neighbors. Kids played outside without parents worrying about chalk on driveways or toys visible from the street. And the HOA had become what it was supposed to be, a tool for maintaining and improving the community, not a weapon for one person's control issues. Gary stopped by a few days later with an interesting update. "Hey, did you hear about the lawsuit?" "What lawsuit?" "3 families are suing Patty personally for the fines they paid to the HOA before she got busted. The Ray's family, the Patels, and the Johnsons. They're arguing that since the fines were based on illegal HOA actions, they should get their money back with interest." "Can they do that?" "Their lawyer thinks so. He's arguing that Patty was acting outside the scope of her authority and that the fines were essentially extortion." I wasn't sure how I felt about that. On one hand, Patty had already paid a heavy price for her actions. On the other hand, if she'd illegally collected money from people, they deserved to get it back. The lawsuit took about a year to wind its way through civil court. Eventually, a judge ruled in favor of the families, finding that the fines had been improperly assessed, and that Patty was personally liable since she had acted beyond the HOA's legal authority. She was ordered to repay approximately $15,000 plus interest to the 3 families. I ran into Donna Martinez at the grocery store around that time. We chatted in the produce section, and she told me she'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Patty had been genuinely humbled by the experience. "I'm not saying she's become a completely different person," Donna said, selecting some tomatoes. "But I think she finally understands that she was out of control. The federal conviction, the fine, the probation, the civil lawsuit, it all added up. She's in therapy, apparently." "I hope it helps her," I said, and I meant it. I'd never wanted to destroy Patty's life. I just wanted her to stop messing with my mailbox and leave people alone. Life continued in Saguaro Springs. The community thrived under new leadership. The HOA even started some initiatives that people actually appreciated, like a neighborhood watch program that actually focused on safety rather than rule enforcement, and a community garden in the common area that anyone could participate in. My mailbox remained perfectly ordinary and perfectly functional. Mail carriers came and went without incident. The Postal Service, in its infinite wisdom and federal authority, continued to operate smoothly. About 2 years after the initial incident, I was elected to the HOA board myself. I'd never planned on getting involved in HOA politics, but several neighbors had asked me to run, saying they trusted me to keep the organization focused on the right things. I agreed, mostly to make sure we never went back to the bad old days of petty tyranny. At my first board meeting, Robert Chen, who was still president, brought up the need to update the HOA's governing documents. "We need to make sure what happened with Patty can never happen again," he said. "We need clear limits on the board's authority, better checks and balances, and explicit prohibitions against certain types of enforcement actions." I volunteered to be on the committee to revise the documents. Over the next several months, we worked with an attorney who specialized in HOA law to create a new set of bylaws and covenants that maintained reasonable community standards while protecting homeowners from overreach. We explicitly stated that the HOA had no authority over mailboxes beyond ensuring they existed and were accessible for mail delivery. We limited fines, created an appeals process, and established term limits for board members. When we presented the new documents to the community for a vote, they passed with over 90% approval. People were tired of living in fear of their HOA and were ready for something better. Inspector Chen, who I'd stayed in touch with occasionally, told me that our situation had become something of a teaching example in postal inspector training. We use your case to illustrate the importance of mailbox tampering laws and how to handle HOA-related mail interference, he said when we met for coffee one afternoon. Not a lot of people realize that mailboxes fall under federal jurisdiction even when they're on private property. I didn't realize it until Jennifer mentioned it, I admitted. I'm just glad I called you instead of trying to handle it myself. You did exactly the right thing. If you'd just cut the lock off yourself and confronted the HOA, it could have escalated into a civil dispute that dragged on for months or years. By reporting it as a federal crime, which it was, you cut through all the HOA politics and got straight to the legal reality. 3 years after the mailbox incident, Patty's probation ended. According to the terms of her sentence, she'd completed her community service, most of it working at a food bank, and paid her fine in installments. The federal conviction would remain on her record, but she could at least move forward with her life. I heard she'd sold her house and moved to that condo in Temp. I hoped she'd found some peace and learned from the experience. Power, even the small amount of power that comes with being an HOA president, can corrupt if you're not careful. Patty had let it go to her head, and it had cost her dearly. As for me, I served 1 term on the HOA board and then stepped down, feeling like I'd done my part to help steer the community in a better direction. My mailbox remained unchanged, still the same standard black metal box it had always been, still doing its job of receiving mail without drama or federal intervention. Sometimes, when I'm getting the mail, I think about that padlock and the absurd chain of events it triggered. A simple act of HOA overreach had led to federal charges, a criminal conviction, civil lawsuits, the removal of an HOA president, a complete restructuring of the HOA's governance, and a cautionary tale used in postal inspector training. All because someone thought they had the right to lock my mailbox. The broader lesson, I think, is about the importance of knowing your rights and being willing to stand up for them, even when it's uncomfortable. If I'd just shrugged and bought a new mailbox to avoid conflict, Patty would have continued her petty tyranny. Other families would have continued to be harassed. The HOA would have remained a source of stress, rather than a genuine community organization. But because I pushed back, because I researched the law and contacted the right authorities, things changed. Not just for me, but for everyone in the neighborhood. That's worth the hassle and conflict it took to get there. Jennifer and I still live in Saguaro Springs. We've watched kids grow up here, new families move in, and the community genuinely become a better place to live. The HOA now exists in the background of our lives, handling necessary tasks without being a source of constant anxiety or frustration. And every time I open my mailbox to retrieve my mail, I'm reminded that sometimes the smallest acts of standing up for yourself can have the biggest impacts. Federal law protected my right to access my mail without interference, and a postal inspector made sure that law was enforced. The system worked the way it was supposed to, even when facing down an HOA president who thought she was above it. My mailbox is just a mailbox, a simple metal box on a post at the end of my driveway. But for a brief period, it became a battleground between HOA overreach and federal law, between petty tyranny and citizens' rights, between one person's need for control and a community's need for reasonable governance. Federal law won, common sense won, and in the end, the whole community won. The mailbox, blissfully unaware of the drama it had caused, continues to perform its intended function day after day, receiving bills and magazines and letters and packages, never locked, never tampered with, just quietly existing as mailboxes are meant to do. And that's exactly how it should be. Looking back now, years later, I can see how that one act of picking up the phone and calling the post office changed so many things. It changed the trajectory of the HOA. It changed Patty's life for better or worse. It changed how the community functioned and how neighbors related to each other. But most importantly, it reinforced something I'd always believed, but had never really had to test. That in America, there are laws that protect regular people from abuse of power, even small-scale power like an HOA president. Those laws mean something. They're enforced. And when you're in the right and you stand your ground, the system can work for you. I never wanted to be the guy who took on the HOA. I never wanted federal investigators involved in my life or to be part of a criminal case. I just wanted to get my mail. But sometimes life puts you in positions where you have to choose between backing down to keep the peace and standing up for what's right. I chose to stand up, and I'd make the same choice again. The neighborhood kids still play in the streets on warm evenings. People still mow their lawns and paint their houses and generally maintain their properties because they take pride in where they live, not because they're afraid of fines. The HOA still exists, but it exists as a service organization rather than an enforcement agency. And my mailbox, ordinary and unremarkable, sits at the end of my driveway, exactly where it's always been, lock-free and doing its job. Sometimes the smallest victories are the most meaningful ones. Mine was the right to access my own mailbox without interference, a right I'd never even thought about until someone tried to take it away. But in defending that right, I helped create lasting change in my community. That's not bad for a simple metal box on a post, not bad at all.